Hello, everyone. Grace here. Before I dive into today's video, I would like to address the responses to my previous video, where I shared finding my ex-partner Neil dead in his apartment. The overwhelming majority of you have been incredibly supportive and caring. Hundreds of thoughtful, compassionate comments that have truly touched my heart. Thank you so much for that outpouring of love and understanding. However, there were a few comments that I wanted to address directly. Some viewers, one in particular, felt that I had deceived my audience because I hadn't previously mentioned Neil's Hoover attempts in my earlier videos. Let me be very clear about something. I've only uploaded 37 videos where I've been systematically unfolding the effects of narcissistic abuse and sharing my story. This channel is relatively new. With only 37 videos, I've barely scratched the surface of the content that I'm working through. There's so much more to cover. The love bombing, the devaluation, the discard, the gaslighting, the triangulation, and yes, the Hoover attempts. I simply hadn't reached this part of the story yet in my content timeline. This channel has been about methodically educating survivors about narcissistic abuse patterns while sharing my authentic experience. I can't cover everything at once. It must unfold one video at a time. I also want to be crystal clear about something else. I did not engage in the Hoover on any romantic or relationship level. The only participation I had was out of compassion. Compassion for Jack the dog, who had been my comfort during my cancer battle. And yes, compassion for Neil, too, when he was sick and needed help. That compassion does not make me weak or foolish. It makes me human. Now, let me tell you about those Hoover attempts, because understanding them is crucial to understanding how I ended up being the person who found Neil when he died. Neil and I officially parted ways in November of 2022. We sold the home that we shared, and I was not really ready to jump into a lease. I needed time to understand what had been happening, time to heal, time to figure out my next steps in life. I was very much suffering in the trauma bond at that time. So instead, I had chosen to travel a little bit rather than sign a lease. So I rented inexpensive Airbnbs by the month while I healed and figured out my next steps. It was April 2023, and I was wrapping up a trip and heading back to Portland for my routine check-in with my leukemia team. During this time, I had been educating myself extensively about narcissistic abuse, reading survivor stories, watching Dr. Romney's videos, learning about the patterns. I kept reading about something called hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner because narcissists try to suck you back into their orbit. And I honestly wondered if Neil would attempt this with me. One evening, after our split, about 5 months, my phone rang, and it was Neil. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the breakup. "I have exciting news," he said, sounding upbeat. "I got a new job that requires a lot of travel, Now, Jake misses you. Maybe you could help me take care of him while I'm away on business trips. Now, I want to pause here because this is where my experience differed dramatically from other Hoover stories that I've read. In most accounts, the narcissist comes back with promises of change. I've been to therapy. I'm going to stop drinking. I realized I was wrong. I want to be a better person. Narcissists, for the most part, do not apologize, but they will often promise things will be different the next time. Neil offered none of that. No acknowledgement of the pain that he caused. No promises to change or be better. It was as if our entire toxic history had been erased, and he was simply presenting a practical arrangement. But here's the thing about the narcissist. They're master strategists. They know exactly which emotional buttons to push. Neil knew that Jack, his little dog, had been my constant companion during my battle with leukemia. When Neil emotionally abandoned me during my illness, Jack never left my side. That dog had comforted me through the night sweats, through the chemo side effects, through the loneliest moments of that fight. Neil weaponized that bond. He knew I wouldn't say no to helping Jack. I had already secured a long-term Airbnb, but I agreed to take care of the dog when needed. In my mind, this was just about Jack and not about us. It was about compassion for an innocent animal who had shown me unconditional love when I needed it most. Let me be absolutely clear. This was not romantic reconciliation. This was not me being weak or falling back into old patterns. This was me making a conscious choice to help an animal I loved, fully aware of what Neil was and what he had done to me. But the narcissist never stops at just one hook. A few months later, Neil invited me to his nephew's wedding back in Minnesota. He appealed to my genuine fondness for his nephew Joel, saying, "Joel really would like to have you at his wedding." This is where I made what I now recognize as a crucial mistake. I thought that because I was educated about narcissistic abuse, because I could see through the tactics, that I could handle the interactions. I believed my knowledge would protect me like armor. So I agreed to go to the wedding, not to reconcile with Neil, but because I truly had love for his nephew and really wanted to be there for him on his special day. That wedding trip was a masterclass in why hoovering works and why it's so dangerous, even for educated survivors. Neil was horrible to me the entire time, cold, dismissive, treating me like an unwelcomed burden he had to tolerate. Yet somehow, I found myself trying to make things pleasant, walking on eggshells and falling back into old patterns despite everything I had learned. This is what I want other survivors to understand. Education about narcissistic abuse is crucial, but it doesn't make you immune to their manipulation. The trauma bond runs deep. It runs deeper than intellectual understanding. I was still deep in my trauma bond recovery at that time. Being around Neil brought back flooding emotions, confusion, that old familiar anxiety. It was like being pulled back into a fog that I thought I had escaped. But I want to emphasize again, I was not trying to get back together with him. I was not hoping for reconciliation. I was a survivor trying to navigate a complex situation with compassion while protecting my own healing. Neil's Hoover strategy went beyond emotional manipulation. He put my name on his apartment lease with no financial obligation on my part. He told me he had no one, and he wanted me to be his emergency contact. We had a joint investment in a winery when we were together. And when we broke up, he had advised me that I should leave it as it is because the investment had taken a plunge and it would be better not to sell until it came back. On the surface, these might seem like generous gestures or signs of trust, but they were actually control mechanisms. Each practical entanglement created another reason that I couldn't cut contact completely, another thread connecting us when I should have been building a completely separate life, which I finally did get around to. Throughout all of the interactions, something felt fundamentally different about Neil. There was a strange energy around him that I wasn't familiar with. He wasn't trying to charm me or win me back romantically. He wasn't love bombing me or even being particularly nice. It was like he was going through the motions of connection without any genuine feeling behind it. This confused me because it didn't match the Hoover patterns that I'd read about. But I understood that narcissists don't always hoover for romantic reasons. Sometimes they hoover for practical convenience, someone to care for them and their responsibilities. Sometimes they hoover to maintain control and power. Also, they hoover ensuring that they have backup supply when other sources fail. And then there is the satisfaction of proving they can still pull you back in. The more I engaged in these situations, the more I realized I needed stronger boundaries. I made a decision. I could continue caring for Jack when Neil traveled, but I would not be there when he returned. I would just drop the dog off and leave before Neil got back. It was the only way I could protect my mental health. Now, to those who would judge me for maintaining contact at all, I understand that no contact is the gold standard advice for dealing with narcissistic abuse. And you're not wrong about that. But life is messy, and healing isn't perfect. I made choices based on compassion for an innocent animal, and yes, even for Neil, when he was genuinely sick or needed some sort of help. That compassion does not make me weak. It does not mean I was falling for his manipulation. It means I retained my humanity despite everything he tried to destroy in me. Some of you might do things differently, and that's okay. But please don't judge survivors who are trying to navigate impossible situations with grace and humanity. We're all doing the best with the tools and understanding we have at that particular time. If you're a survivor watching this, here are the crucial lessons from my Hoover experience. Hoovering doesn't always look like romantic pursuit. Sometimes it's practical, seemingly reasonable requests that slowly pull you back into their orbit. You can maintain boundaries even within limited contact. My choice to care for Jack, but to avoid Neil, shows that you can make selective choices that honor your values while protecting yourself. Compassion for your abuser doesn't mean weakness. When Neil was genuinely sick, I offered help. That's who I am at my core, and I won't apologize for that. They know your pressure points. Neil knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. My love for Jack, my fondness for his nephew, my natural compassion. Healing is not linear or perfect. You might make choices that others judge, but you're the one living your life and walking your healing journey. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through sharing this difficult story. To those of you who felt the need to criticize, with only 37 videos, I'm still unfolding this complex story methodically. There's so much content to cover, and I have only scratched the surface. Remember, healing looks different for everyone. Trust your own journey. Honor your own values, and don't let anyone shame you for being an empathetic human being.